I think after working in corporate, it got very muddled what authenticity was. So I'm in a journey right now to finding that authenticity for me too. But I just think it's like more showing up everywhere as your true self. The baggage that I've had my entire career has been always the feedback of I'm too bossy or I'm too much. So I learned to tone that down, and I think that's why I fit so well in corporate America when I was in that for 5 years. But I think now I'm like, no, it's okay to be a lot, and it's okay. It's just who I am. Why do I have to tone it down? So I'm on a journey to find that meaning of what authenticity is for me again. So I don't know if it's an answer, but
yeah. Nah, you're not alone. You know, what's interesting is that like, if I could search all the episodes and find out what words people use to describe authenticity, or like some of the pushback that people have got, a lot of women specifically have gotten too much, like those very specific words. Even before you got into corporate, was that something that you heard growing up too, or was it just when you got into corporate?
Like at home?
At home, in school?
I think at home, my mom is too much. So she always embraced that part of me, and just like being very like outspoken, and just like, so when I guess when I got to school, more specifically when I moved here. So I moved to the US 20 years ago. I'm from Colombia, and I moved in the middle of 10th grade.
What part of Colombia?
De Bogotá.
First of all, I love Colombia. I've only been to Medellin, but I want to go to Barranquilla. I want to go to Cali. I want to go to Bogotá. There's also Cartagena. There's so many cities in Colombia that I want to go to. Many. But and your money
goes long ways over there. So you are rich when you go there, because right now the dollar is so expensive. But I haven't been back in 20 years. I'm a political refugee. So I haven't been back. So it's also like that disconnection of who I am as a Colombian in the US. But anyway, so when I moved here, I think I had to just kind of like, because you're trying to fit in, right? So I think in high school, I started high school here when I was in the middle of 10th grade. So kind of like the fitting in, figuring out who I was. Because in Colombia, I was in like private school. It was an all girls school. It was just very different. When I came here, we landed in Maryland. It's a city called Gaithersburg, and the high school there was not the easiest one. I've never in my life had seen a fight. And it was like the first time I saw a fight in a high school, and like two girls fighting. And it just wasn't something that I had ever seen. So like even adjusting to all of that. So I think I had to like reevaluate and find who I was. So maybe that authenticity kind of maybe got watered down there too. We landed in Maryland, and then I moved to Florida for school, stayed in Miami for 6+ years, went to school there, started my career there. And then I moved to Texas, to Austin. But then there I was surrounded by a lot of Mexicans and Latinos. And like, it was still kind of like it felt like somewhat familiar. It was new, but it was somewhat familiar. And then I moved to Minnesota, where there's a bunch of white people, and it was really hard. I think I lost myself into I needed to fit in. And that's when I moved here for the company the corporation I was with before, but it was really hard.
Tell me about that part. You said, you started to lose yourself. In what way do you think you started to lose yourself?
It was just, again, that like same fitting in. And then I remember going to an event here, and I finally connected with 2 Latinas, but they were models. And so like, the model like stereotype here is like long black hair, thick accent, and like they're like very extravagant, which is like, if that's how they want to portray themselves, awesome. But like, I don't fit that stereotype either. I'm like, I don't have lighter hair, I have lighter skin tone. So I just didn't feel, I wasn't Latina enough to hang out with them, but I'm also like obviously not white to hang out with like the other people here. So it was like a whole journey of like connecting back to Latinos like me. So it was definitely a process of connecting back with my Latino roots, and because I wasn't immersed in it. In Miami, obviously, like everyone's Latino, and in Texas, a lot of Mexicans learn a lot about their culture, but here was just nothing. So
that's interesting. Yeah, no, that makes sense too. And yeah, I mean, I think that assimilation, or that wanting to fit in or desire to fit in, I think that's natural, right? Like that's biological. Like we always, back in the day, we wanted to be we all were part of tribes. You know what I mean? But it's interesting for you. Like, I'm wondering, like when you looked around and didn't see anyone that looked like you, what did you see? What did you hear? Like, did you start watching like Friends and Seinfeld and like all of those kind of shows? Like, what did you start picking up?
It was interesting because when I got here, it was a couple of things that I noticed was my entire career has been an agency side. So this was like the only and first corporate job that I had. And it was always like, for example, for lunchtime at agency with like my Latino coworkers, we would like stop for an hour, we all go together to like the cafeteria or whatever, and we all eat and have a moment where like here it was just like eating at your desk. Like that was just the norm. And to me, that was so weird. Yeah. And also the fact that they have lunch too early, like 11:30, they start having lunch. And like, I don't know, what time do you have lunch usually?
You know what's funny? Like I take my lunch, or I used to take my lunch depending on like when I didn't have a meeting. So like
your workload.
Yeah, like it wasn't even when I was hungry. It was when I didn't have a meeting.
When you were able to eat.
Yeah.
But here they eat very early. They start at like 11:30. And like, I feel like for Latinos, or like in my past jobs, also we've been like 1:30. So stuff like that. And then like not being able to speak Spanish with anyone was really hard. I was the first Latina that was hired there. So like not being able to speak Spanish with anyone, not because I wasn't allowed to, it was just like, there was nobody to talk to. When I was used to like before in my past jobs to like just pop my head up and ask a question in Spanish and I get 10,000 answers. Here it was just like, no, this is not. So that was hard.
It's fascinating too, because if you go into it, I see a bunch of people that look like me shopping around. And maybe this is just like a low bar that I have compared to other like retailers, but I think they do a really good job of incorporating like other small businesses, like Latino owned, Latina owned, and even Black owned. But it's interesting though, right? Like just because the shoppers that shop there look like me or whatever, doesn't mean like the employees do as well. Like I just made a post about this about Adidas. Like if you look at Adidas, you know, they sponsor Kanye, they sponsor Beyonce, but their executive team doesn't look like that. Their board of directors don't look like that. And then like, if you look at the number of employees, their diversity rates are like so low. So I think it's always interesting looking at like marketing or stuff like that versus like the actual employee base.
Wasn't that what happened with Beyonce that she walked into? Was it Puma or something? And like her line, like Ivy was supposed to be with Puma, but then she was like, nobody that worked on this looks like me. It just makes no sense for you to have my business. That she walked away from it.
Really?
Yeah, which I remember that story to me was like very impactful, and like one of the reasons why I got into corporate, because I could see that in corporate you can create true change versus when you're an agency, you can tell your client, but there's so much that you can do. But when you are the client, there's just so much power, and I think with that power comes also a lot of responsibility, right? Because being the voice for an entire community and such a high moment, it's a lot of responsibility. So that can also like burn you out. It's a lot of pressure.
I've also thought of the same thing. So I've never worked at an agency, but I've always been on the platform side, as I call it. So like working at Facebook, working at TikTok. And like, so I would work with brands, I don't know, like Samsung, for example. But I'm just one voice in their ear, right? Like Samsung also works with Pinterest and Twitter and TikTok, everybody, right? So I wonder sometimes, like, what would it be like if I worked at Samsung, like try to drive that change that I actually want to see, like at the client. So it's interesting for you, like you've actually seen both sides.
Yeah. It's very nerve-wracking. I think there was a moment that I was like, I can't do it alone. And I was the only one. I started the multicultural creative team and I was the only one. And I was literally on every single campaign. And I just said, this is just one person's opinion. It's just not possible for me to represent every single Latino, because also Latinos are not a monolith. So like, I want to have Afro Latino here. I want to have somebody from then we hired like a Puerto Rican girl. So like just those different points of views. So then we started expanding the team, and it got to be like, I think right now they're about like, I would say like 9 creatives on the multicultural creative team. So it was great to see it grow. I think I just could not be a part of it anymore.
Okay, I'm getting a way better understanding of like what your work is and all of those things. So what were some of those things that when you were on the agency side, you were like, I wish I was on the client side because I want to see this and that change?
For example, like allocating media dollars to different places that is not Univision. Nothing against Univision. It's just Telemundo and Univision are specific generations that is just not who the future customers. So for specifically, it's just like, okay, why are you not putting your money on like, I don't know, Pero Like, or, you know, there's just so many other places that they can be talking to like us. So that change, I was able to make it happen. I was able to bring in, so it's funny when you were talking about like how they support minority owned business. It's not, it happens because people like us are inside putting pressure. That doesn't happen because they are, oh, we care, and like that, and that's the hard thing, that working for a brand that in the outside looks so shiny and beautiful and inclusive, but the inside is a completely different story. So I think that was the biggest heartache for me, running into a wall of you're not what you portray and people think that you are. But it's a lot of like, it's up to us when we get into those places just to keep driving change for our communities to show up, you know?
Yeah, like behind every very cool inclusive marketing campaign or every small business that you see within like a large retailer, there's a person that fought for that to happen.
Exactly.
That
doesn't just happen because like some white dude up there said, you know what, we should bring it down. That does not. It was years of fighting for even like a Latino Heritage Month campaign. It was years of me like advocating if we need a moment. Obviously not just me, I cannot take the credit, but it was a lot of Latinos that we had that as a bigger goal.
Interesting. And what were some of those walls that you ran into, whether they be verbal no's because of X, Y, and Z, or just like people not even listening? I'm just curious.
A lot of the walls were more of like the typical response of like, we've never done it that way. That's how we always do it. Like, this is how we target. Like, we've always had Univision as a partner. So like, that's how we do things. And I'm like, okay, but like, why? Have you ever stopped and asked why? I think changing processes, it was like the biggest obstacle of people being open-minded, of being even just understanding, for example, the Spanglish aspect of our realities as young Latinos. And like, that's literally, I say that Spanglish is my first language. Like, that's how I communicate with my husband. My husband is also Colombian, but that's how we communicate at home. It's just like our primary. I only speak pure Spanish when I'm with my parents, and then at work it's just pure English. But like my true self, I speak Spanglish. Is that just like, but like they had never even heard the term. They were like, but there is no like media that addresses that. And then back then, Univision actually would like not let you run anything in Spanglish. It had to be pure Spanish. So that's how old school their mentality. I think now they're changing that, but that's how old school was the mentality back then.
You know what's hilarious? So every brand that I've worked on at all these companies, I've ironically, but I don't think it's a coincidence. Like I've been like the lead on multicultural to like sell into like the clients that I work with. So like AT&T or Samsung, whatever, right? So I go into these meetings and I talk to the directors or the VPs of multicultural marketing at some of these corporations to tell them that they need to stop. So that to tell them, just like BuzzFeed will be like, yo, you should advertise on Pero Like. I'm like, no, you should advertise on Facebook. You should advertise on Instagram, right? And like, I will get the same feedback from them. They'd be like, oh, but no, like, we have all our needs met with Univision. And I'm like, do you realize like Latinos, they over-index on social media, right?
Yeah.
Not to mention like all these other outlets and stuff like that. So it's some of the same things that I would get met with, but then I also had to realize like the people that I'm talking to, they don't consume Pero Like. Because although they're consumers of the brand, probably looks like me and as is my age, the people making those decisions don't look like me and aren't my age. So it's like a fight, but also like an education that you have to do with them as well.
That's what I felt like. It's a lot of like me educating so many people, even higher ups. I had to like had a moment with a chief executive of like, no, you're actually messing up here, and I'm going to tell you why. But that's like kind of like going back of authenticity, and it didn't sit well with me. And you're like, okay, you put me in this position for a reason, so I'm going to call you out when you're wrong because you are a white man from Wisconsin and I need to call you out,
But I'm curious, how did you get to that point where, for a long time you were assimilating, you were, trying to fit in? You speaking up to an executive, that is not fitting in. That is standing out. People will be like, whoa, did you hear her say that? How'd you get the confidence to do that? What happened?
It was so they used to have something called like some survey that they do every year just to get a gauge of like how are team members feeling, like are they happy, are they like and it came back to like, so it's supposed to be anonymous, but they have like a specific question that like if you answer it a certain way, they know that you are not a white team member. So they knew that a lot of people of color that were working there were not happy. So it all started with like having honest conversations. Like the head of creative, he said, okay, I want to chat with you guys. I want to know what's going on. And it's like, okay, if you're opening up and being vulnerable, you want us to do the same, but you also need to be ready to hear the bad side of things. And I opened the statement of my first day was election day of 2016. That was my first week. And I remember specifically a white coworker, she's a woman, and she said, it doesn't make a difference for me who wins. Mind you, I'm like sitting right next to her and I'm a refugee. And I'm like, I can literally get deported during the whole presidency of former presidents that I don't even like to say the name, but like during the whole 4 years, I was with that fear of like, I can get deported any day. And my 20 years of my life here can be gone. But here's this person sitting with her white privilege saying it doesn't make a difference to me. So that was my first week, and that was my first impression of what it was to be living and working here. That set the tone for a lot of things, and it put my guard up of like, I just need to like be careful who I talk to, who I trust, and like the levels of true white privilege. I think this was the first place that I really like saw it.
Yeah, that resonates with me a lot. I remember when, and I'm getting goosebumps about it, but I remember when certain incidents would happen at work, and not the election, but I remember like, I don't know, Trayvon Martin, for example, gets like murdered in the street, or like any of these kind of like just public murders. And I remember they never got acknowledged at work. Like literally no one would talk about it. And it wasn't until maybe George Floyd where executives like simply acknowledged it. It was like, yo, hey, everyone, this happened. Let's hold space. Let's talk about it. Or they'll say something like, if anyone needs like, some time off, take a break, blah, blah. But like simply just like acknowledging it started happening rather recently. I'm wondering, did you see a similar change like overall?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, with George Floyd happening here in Minneapolis, like we were at the epicenter of the change. So it had to be like we push for a lot of like, you need to see us as humans that I hate when people say when you step into work, you leave everything from the outside world outside. Like that is not a thing. That is completely toxic. That just keeps feeding into just this rhetoric of you're not a human, you're here to do a specific job. But it's like I can't leave that behind. I can't stop being a refugee once I stepped into a corporate world. I am still that person, and I am at risk of being deported any minute because I am still trying to figure out how do I get my green card, all these other things. But like that's in the back of my mind. So specifically when the George Floyd thing happened, that also gave me the courage of speaking up about other things. And I started sending people to HR left and right. So I just, at that point, I had no patience for anything anymore. I'm like, you're having microaggressions here and there. You are a problem. And I would tell my boss, and I'm like, I want to send them to HR and you guys need to figure it out. Because at that point, I was just fed up with obviously what I kept seeing with other team members, especially Black team members, but they were more skeptical of speaking up. At that point, I had no problem speaking up. I'm like, what's the worst thing that can happen? Are they going to fire me in this moment where like, literally this is what the entire world is talking about of like discrimination, and like, it's not the best look for them right now. So I as well just take the opportunity and speak up. But a lot of it felt like performative from their side. I don't know how you felt it on yours, but it was okay. They acknowledged they did what they had to do. And I feel like that's fading away. Like the momentum is like, okay, well, we did it. Are we back to normal? It's like, no, the world will never go back to normal. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think so many things that corporations do are so performative. And it's interesting too, because going back to that example for me, when people started acknowledging things, I kind of found it fishy. And I was speaking to a friend about it, and I was like, yo, I mean, I get like this is a big moment and I understand why they're acknowledging. But funny thing is that I found out that managers around the same time started being judged on their performance review on how inclusive their team felt, or how they just included a bunch of like D, E, and I metrics. And I was like, oh, word. Now that it's affecting your bank account, now you're starting to give a fuck, essentially. So yeah, I agree. I think a lot of the stuff felt performative. I'm curious because you alluded to like a bunch of microaggressions, and I have so many stories on that. But any of them stick out to you when you think back at some of those moments?
Oh my God, yeah. Also, when I started there was one creative director. We were about to shoot a campaign and we were looking at casting, and we had it like it was for kids. And so we were looking at all the pictures on like a table. And I noticed there were no Latino kids. I mean, Latino looking, I hate when I say that because it's also like Latinos look 10,000 different ways, but like
I
the
understand though.
Latino, so I was like, there's no Latino kids. Shouldn't we have some? And then the answers that I got from this straight white woman was, there are some brown ones over there. And I looked, and like the brown ones she was referring to were obviously Filipino. And I'm like, no, that's like it. I didn't say anything at the moment because I don't know how you react to microaggressions, but it's so like shocking that you're like fucking kidding me. But like also you don't know what to say. But now thinking back on it, even now I get so angry just because like, how dare you say brown people where like there's a entire diaspora of like what brown means, you know? So one of those that was like quite shocking.
Yo, oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not even like exaggerating. Like I'm literally getting goosebumps about these stories. Like I could see myself being there, and then I could see myself as you asked the question, like, I don't know how you would react. And I feel like we don't even know until we're put in those situations. You know what I mean? Like I've gotten so many microaggressions, and I'll say before I went to therapy, I didn't say anything because I didn't really know what to say or how to say it. It's like I had a feeling, but I didn't know how to communicate that feeling. And one thing therapy taught me was how to communicate emotions and feelings. Before therapy in that situation, I would have been like, I would just shook my head and been like, oh, okay, moving on, you know? Now I would have, I don't know, I hope I would have said something along the lines of like, I don't feel seen, or like, I don't feel heard, or like something along those lines. I feel like without therapy, I would have said something else, and then I would have got like an additional microaggression, like, oh my God, like chill out. You're being so loud. You're being a lot.
You're so aggressive, whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel like we often don't know how to react to some of these situations, and then we get additional negative labels, unfortunately.
Yeah, I hear you. And it's funny that you talk about therapy because I was telling ex-coworker of mine, I was like, if I could build that company for the amount of therapy I've gone through because of them ever since I left the job, I wish that was like one of those like new benefits the company is to like go to therapy for free, because it's like the trauma that we carry, and like when we have all those microaggressions, we just carry it within us. And like I still think about that thing that happened 4 years ago, and it makes me so angry. And I wish I would have I have so many scenarios in my head of like what I could have said, what I could have done, but it's gone. The moment's gone. And that's just something that I'll have to carry with me for, I don't know how long, but I'm trying to let go. I'm really on that path right now, like letting go. It was tough. And then how I left was also very tough. And I don't know, I'm on that journey right now in therapy.
Yeah. What do you mean that when you left, it was tough?
I think that when I came here I had a very specific goal of, I remember telling my husband that I wanted to take over multicultural and like make it a bigger goal and that's what I did. I created my own team, all the things. But then when the moment happened to step into being the actual director of that team, they gave it to another person that had less experience, that had been there for less time, and it hurt a lot because I was the one to have the tough conversations. I was the one to push the envelope. I was the one so like in my head I was like, it's just a no-brainer. It's my position. So when they didn't, it was a slap in the face. But I'm also starting to see now 4 months later that it opened the doors for so many amazing things. And the job that I have right now, where my new boss is very open. She's a white woman, but she's very receptive of who I am, the authenticity that I bring now of like, I am very direct. I am here. Honestly, I stopped, and maybe that's a little bit toxic, but in my new job, I'm like, I'm here to work. I'm not here to make friends. And it's easier remotely because you don't have that like socialization moment, but I'm trying to show up in a more authentic way because I don't want to set up myself into that way. And the other thing is that I made my entire identity.
Yeah.
I absorbed everything, and I was just I drank the Kool-Aid too hard.
It's good at the moment. It tastes really good.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. But then when you're gone, it's like, how do you get rid of that? Like, I still felt part of it. And I still see my friends from here and there. And it's when they talk about, like, I still feel like I have FOMO and I want to be there, but also like, do I don't know. you know?
Yeah. I know it's really difficult to talk about some of these situations because in many ways we're reliving it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I do want to let you know that although it may be difficult to have this conversation, I'm sure someone is listening to this, is watching this, and will feel seen, heard. And my hope is that it'll inspire someone to be the person that you are these days, a little bit more outspoken, a little bit more confident in who you are and all those things. So, I mean, talking about these days, sounds like you're in much more of a safe place. Could you talk a little bit more about like the culture that you're in now, the work culture, maybe like the leadership, like what are some of those things that make you feel a lot safer now?
Before I jump into that, I just want to say also, like, when I was at the darkest moments when I found your account on TikTok, and because obviously I was consuming a lot of like the toxicity of corporate America, and you came across my FYP, and like you were that person for me. You were like, somebody else feels like that, and somebody else has the balls to say it on TikTok. And to me, that was like mind blowing. And because of you, I've started to post a lot more about like corporate and like job related things that I think are toxic or like, but yeah, that's how I found you. So I just want to say thank you because you were that person for me.
Wow, that honestly means a lot. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, your work does not go unnoticed. And I remember, I think you were just starting at the time, and like, but I've been following you ever since, and I just resonate with everything. So every time you go on live, I'm like, oh, what does he have to say? And I'm like, I just love your content. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, of course. And then the new job, I think the nature of I'm starting a new team again. It seems like that's just like the path I have in my life to start new teams.
You're starting new teams, yeah.
I'm starting the creative team in influencer agency, which is very different, and it requires a very different mentality. But when I got into the job, my boss, who's my boss right now, she told me a couple of questions that she did at the beginning, even and the interview side was she never dismissed my experience. Where, for example, when we talked about salary and the new job, she said, where do you want to be? She never asked me, where are you? Or what was your salary before? She didn't care about that past. She cared like, where do you want to be? So I shoot my number, and then we went from there. To me, that change of like how she said things told me a lot about who she was and her mentality, like very like in the future. She had a vision. And then a couple of things, just when I accepted the job and I started working here, she was like, if you have any processes or anything that you think worked at like or other jobs in your past that you feel like we can bring in here, please let me know. Like, any process here is not set in stone. We're starting a new team. So that openness to me just made me feel like she sees me for who I am right now and what I bring. I don't need to prove anything to her. I never felt that way in this new job, that I had to prove. And for a moment in time, I suffer from really bad imposter syndrome. But for a moment in time, when I started this job, that imposter syndrome completely went away. I felt seen. I felt recognized for my experience, for what I bring to the table. And it was just such a beautiful feeling. I think now it's happening again, just because now everybody recognizes me, and you're like, why is everybody being so like that? You know, like that's just, but yeah, I think it's just small changes in how people talk to you, your boss, your coworkers, that just makes you feel a little bit safer.
Yeah, I feel like imposter syndrome never even goes away, because as soon as you try something new, it's like a new phase of there's probably somebody doing this way better than me, right? Like, I'm comfortable in corporate doing my sales job, right? But as soon as I start even creating content on TikTok, right, I'm just like, I'm new in this space. There's people like you making way better videos than me. And I'm just
comparing.
Yeah, but it's just like what we do, right? Like, we're always comparing. And it's interesting. My therapist told me one time, which is so true. She's like, we never compare, quote unquote, down. We always compare up. Like, if I got even if I got like 500 followers, I'm never looking like, oh, well, there's someone out there with 2 followers. No, I'm looking up, and I'm just like, there's somebody with 10,000 followers or 100,000 followers. So I struggle with that as well. Like, I compare myself all the time. I'm constantly telling myself I'm not enough.
Yeah. I wonder though, like, that's something I'm also like uncovering in therapy, and like how that maybe comes from like even our childhood, and just Latino parents are very demanding, and we don't, are you the oldest in your house, or like you have more siblings?
Only child.
Only child. Okay. So like that, I'm sure the pressure is even more. Like, you don't have room for failure. You are the only one that has to show up for your family. And I'm the oldest one out of 3. And to me, it's like, I have to set the pace for them. So like, even when I went to college, I currently have like $140,000 in like student debt. So I was a guinea pig for my parents to know what my other siblings should not do. So they don't have student loans. They went to school because they got grants and they got scholarships. But when we got here, we didn't know. My parents didn't know. They were trying to do the best. But that's also like a little bit going back to the imposter syndrome of like the pressure of the first generation, like us immigrants, kids, like we are suffering from a lot of that.
Yeah. Oh, and then when you tackle that on top of like work trauma and just life in general, it's tough. It's tough. I mean, we can have a whole session on therapy. I love that you're in therapy. Not only in it, but I love that you're talking about it, because I think it's changing a little bit, but I feel like a lot of people don't talk about it, and that type of representation is needed so that someone else could be like, oh, I can go. Like the only reason I started going to therapy, or that I felt comfortable going to therapy, is because one of my best friends, who's also Dominican, who was going through a divorce, he said, I was like, oh, like, how are you doing? Like, how are you getting over it? Blah, blah. He's like, I'm going to therapy. I was like, what? People do that? So because of him, like he was my representation that I needed to start going.
You just need like that little push, but it's also like, I feel like in the Latino community, it's just such a taboo, and like you go there porque estás loco, like, but no, that doesn't have to be to that extent of going that's what I'm trying to avoid, keep my sanity. Exactly. That's why I go to therapy and like uncover a lot of things, and I'm a big advocate for it. I'm happy to talk about it. I am also going through some personal stuff of fertility with my husband, and just us going through that journey now. And I'm very open about those things because to your point, it's like, you don't know who's watching, and maybe I can inspire somebody else to like be brave and step into. And actually, I got one of my followers sent me an DM the other day telling me that she went to therapy because I gave her the encouragement that she needed to like take that little step. And that to me, that means the whole world. Like I don't care about the brand deals. I don't care about the followers. If one person did that, I'm like, I did my job, you know?
Seriously, same. Yeah. That's beautiful. I also want to touch on, because I think it's so fascinating, like the influencer / content creator community, because the way that I see them, and I feel like it's such a dope time in marketing and content creation right now, because in many ways I think UGC is making a comeback, where I think before is about like being very polished and all these things, and not only aesthetically, but like what content creators are talking about. I think especially on TikTok is just like, oh my God, like, what you didn't say that on your Instagram, you didn't say that on your LinkedIn. I was like, thank you for finally being honest. And I think like you, one, being a content creator yourself, but two, at an agency full of content creators representing content creators, like I see them as more like spokespersons or like ambassadors for their little niche community or big niche community. You know what I mean? So I'm just fascinated by content creators and how vulnerable and open they are these days. I feel like they're also helping to what I'm trying to do, right? In redefining professionalism, but just like empower authenticity in general. Do you feel like that too?
100%. I think that was one of the big pushes to taking this new job of like working with people that are real. They're not scripted. They have real lives, and we are letting them do their thing. Whereas in traditional advertising and marketing, it's like you have a script. When you go and shoot, like, yes, you have like the glam of like the big shoots and the amazing directors and famous people and all these things, but like it's all scripted. This has been approved by everyone and their mother out there. And like, there are things that like, for example, would have never said about the LGBTQIA community and how it's rooted in like Black and Latino people that pretty much started the movement and like liberation on that side. And I would never acknowledge that. Now I get to work with creators that are not scared to say that on their channels because they have built the credibility to say that and they're not scared of it. So that to me is like, it's a huge like relief of like, and a little bit of hope of marketing of like, we can do good things while paying them. Cause that's one thing, paying creators, because Black and Latino creators don't get nearly enough paid what white content creators do. But it's because we don't ask for it. I've realized that we just don't, I don't know how you feel, but I feel like we are taught to be always grateful for the opportunities versus, no, you're contacting me for a reason. You want me for a reason. So like, pay me, you know? So
I've been there. I've taken offers. I remember when Facebook sent me their offer, I didn't even negotiate. I just took it.
Like, you were so thrilled.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I learned from that, but yeah, I 100% agree. What about, it's interesting for you because you're not only working at an agency that represents and, you know, helps a bunch of creators, but you're also a creator yourself. And I don't know if you feel this way, but like part of this, you know, traditional professionalism is like, especially being in sales, like if something happens within the company, like I'm also given a script on like what to say to external people. I'm told not to talk to reporters, right? All of those things.
Yes.
And in many ways, I thought forever, I'm like, I can't share my personal opinion on like where I work. Like if something happens at TikTok, I'm like, I'm not going to share my opinion on TikTok. I can't do that. I can't criticize them. But like you have a platform and you have a bunch of followers. Like, do you think about that these days as far as like, ooh, this is what I can say, this is what I can't say? And I'm sure that's also changed.
Yes, 100%. So that's one of the, when I worked, they had an issue with me being a content creator because I couldn't work with any competitors. But like, everyone's a competitor. Sells everything except what, tires? I can't talk about tires. Like, so it was really hard to convince them of like, let me do my thing. Because I also think that for Latino and Black communities and people, creators, we are built into, especially the newer generations, to having different streams of income. Having one job, that cannot be my only source of inspiration, creativity, and income. Like, that's just inconceivable in my mind. And it really hurt when because I told them from the beginning, from my interview, I have a blog and like, it's a package thing. So like, if you want me, you have to let me in. So I was very open and clear and transparent. And 3 years into it, they told me, you can't do it anymore. They basically wanted me to shut. So I was like, okay, so if you don't want me to do it anymore, are you going to bring in the $50,000 that my blog is giving me every year? Or what's the trade-off here? They said, no, we can't do that. And I'm like, okay, so no. My answer is no. But when I never spoke, when I talked about, and a lot of it happened during the 2020 civil unrest and all those things, a lot of people reached out to me because they knew I worked at, so they wanted me to they're like, hey, why is you not doing this? Or why is you doing this? And I would say my opinion, but I would have to disclaim on the, like, a little like text overlay saying these are my personal opinions. This does not represent. But they would, for example, they would never let you be a speaker at any conference unless you're an executive level. That really bothered me because I love this. I love connecting with people. I love inspiring people. I used to go to a lot of conferences, be a speaker in a lot of conferences. And like, so when I got here and they were like, no, you can't do that. You can't represent. There was just a lot of like censorship there. Whereas here, when I told my boss, and I obviously we got into the interview and all those things, I told her, it's a package deal. There is no negotiation. She's like, I really don't care what you do. You can work with other influencer agencies. I don't care. Like she even said like, it'll be even better for us because now we could have like, you could tell us how they operate and we can bring that in house. So like, it's just a different mentality of, again, is having a vision to what the future employee and consumer is.
Yeah.
You know?
I think, in my opinion, I think it's less about like you working with competitors. And I think it's more about them being scared of how powerful your voice is. You know what I mean? Like, imagine all of these, I mean, like literally this interview, you know what I mean? Like we're probably scared of this conversation, people hearing this conversation and it looking bad on their brand. I'm
going to be honest, it was a very toxic place at the end. And I don't want anyone to walk into there was this weird phenomenon that happened when you walk in there with like your hopes up and your I made it, mom. I made it to like corporate America. It came with a status, right? Working. And then you run into a wall and you have a heartbreak of like, it's not what I thought it was. So I was always very honest with like any new people that were coming to, and like, if I had a chance to talk to them or interview them, I would say, I'm going to be very candid. This and this and this happened. Because I don't want that to ever happen to another person of color. And even in this new job, when I was interviewing for my new team, I was like, it's going to be tough. It's going to get sticky. We're creating something together, but we also get it to make it ours. So like, I can't promise every day is going to be amazing. When we were going through this interview process for my new team, she said, remember that they're also interviewing us. We're not only interviewing them. So like in that moment, they get to also interview us and think if it's a good fit. And that to me was also eye-opening on like, yes, we have to make a good impression too and be honest. And it was hard when I left of leaving that status, right? It came with certain power. And I'm sure you felt the same way at TikTok of like, when you told people I work at TikTok and like everyone's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
That shiny, beautiful
they put you on a pedestal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like to me, it's like the equivalent of like a blue check mark.
Yeah.
Depending on
verified.
where you are.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That is true. Yeah.
All right. So to wrap up, I mean, I love where you are now. Just like how much you've grown personally. What's one thing that continues to inspire you to continue being your most authentic self at work?
Right now, because I'm in this new journey of being a manager and a director, right now it's showing up for my team. They are my priority. The work gets done if my team is happy. So they are my priority. I protect their time. Fridays, for example, is our flex days, and I make sure that by 1 p.m. they're logged out. If I see them on Slack, I'm like, what are you doing? Go have fun. You should not be here. So like, that's my priority right now, making sure they're happy, because it was everything that I didn't have in the past. Right now, that's my one thing, showing up for them. And I'm just learning to be a leader overall, you know. I'm brand new to this. So I want to be humble enough to recognize sometimes I don't know everything, you know.